Okay, hi you guys. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Amy. I'm the author of Falling into Place, and this is where the world ends. And over quarantine, I finished my third book, The Cartographers. So a really fun fact actually about Falling into Place was that Falling into Place wasn't the original title that I had written under. So when we got closer to publication, I remember getting like an email with like 20 different title options that like we all looked at together and like ranked our favorite ones. And like Barnes and Noble had somebody there who was like also like voting on their favorite ones, and it was this like big like marketing team effort to figure out like what the right title should be. So yeah, I started writing when I moved to Wisconsin. I did not move from New York. I moved to New York for college, but I moved from St. Louis, like the suburbs of St. Louis. So moving to rural Wisconsin was still just like a really big culture shock for me. And I think like some of my school records had gotten mixed up. So I was like repeating classes, and all of a sudden I had a lot more free time than I had had previously. So I was reading a lot more and I was starting to write. So I finished my first manuscript, like literally in this notebook. And then I had typed it all out and I started writing a second manuscript. And this was in 2008, 2009. So it was really like, I don't know, it felt like this period, like this golden age of YA. I think like the Hunger Games, like the trilogy wasn't finished yet. It was like right after Twilight. So I was reading a ton of YA, and it felt so like integral and influential to my life. So I started trying to write it. So I wrote a manuscript. I guess by then I'd written two, and then I wrote like a sequel to one of them. And I started like, I had this like big pile of manuscripts that I was sitting on. So I started thinking like, maybe I'll look into publication, like maybe I'll just try it and see what it's about. And it was really lucky that by then there were a ton of resources online. Most of like the literary agencies had moved to taking email queries instead of like paper queries. So like it became this like really viable option to just like send out as many like as I could and see what happened. So the way that book publishing works is that you have to like email a cover letter of your book to agencies, and if they like it, they'll ask for more. And the agents are the only ones who can bring your book to a publisher. So I did a ton of research. I like bought books about like agencies in New York that were notable, and I just started sending out queries. So I joined a bunch of online communities where people would look over your queries and people would share critiques, and you would see a bunch of people's different queries. So it was a really good way to become familiar with just like the format and like the tone that you use, I guess. So I started doing that. I sent out probably 40 queries. And with that first book, I actually ended up finding my agent. So I did all of this when I started when I was 14, and I was so shy about it. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing it. I didn't tell like anyone outside of my immediate household that I had like ever written a book. And when I was querying, I didn't tell anyone my age. So I think in hindsight, it was probably pretty obvious that I was 14. And my agent, when she offered representation, she obviously Googled me. So like the only things that came up were my high school like publication. So it was like pretty obvious. But she didn't bring it up until she offered representation and we had that call. So that was super exciting for me. It feels like a bit of a blur now, but that first book that I sent to her didn't end up selling. And I was really disappointed. I ended up writing my like college application essay about it because I had really put in a lot of work into it. And I thought, you know, like once I got the agent, like it's a smooth sailing from there. But while that was out on submission, I started working on what would become Falling into Place. So I actually did that for National Novel Writing Month. I'm sure like a bunch of you have done it before, but basically it's just like you write a novel in a month. So I had taken 2 short stories that I wrote for English class, and I had been planning on turning them into a manuscript length work. And so I did that for National Novel Writing Month. and it became Falling Into Place. And I sent it to my agent, and she obviously was really skeptical because, you know, like after November ends, like there's this big influx of like manuscripts that were written during National Novel Writing Month. And I was like, this book was so special to me. It like was such a therapeutic thing to write. And I sent it to her, and it ended up selling in like 3 days to HarperCollins. It was so crazy. I like got the phone call saying that like it was going to get published in like AP chemistry class, which was not a class that like I was doing well in or like needed distractions from. So yeah, basically that was like a brief intro to how this all happened for me. So yeah, from there I edited Falling Into Place. I got to really see like the behind the scenes of the publishing world, which was really exciting for me. I got to meet like some of my favorite authors. I remember when Falling Into Place was coming out, I flew into like Book Expo America to do like a bit of publicity stuff, and I got to meet like Marcus Zuzak, who wrote The Book Thief, and I like couldn't speak when I saw him. I got my book signed, and I was so starstruck, and it was so exciting. That was the weekend that I was graduating high school, so I flew out for the weekend, and then I flew back Saturday night so that I could graduate Sunday. So it was like a real whirlwind, and it was super exciting. And then after, I think that summer or maybe a little bit before that, I signed a second contract with my same publisher, saying that I would write 2 more books, which seemed like a really good idea at the time. And obviously it was really flattering for me to like get that call, but I went straight to college that fall, and the workload became so much. I was so overwhelmed in college. I was like on deadline for my book. I remember like being in the library so many nights, like until sunrise, and like stumbling home, trying to balance it. And like I said earlier, the Cartographers I finished this year, like 4 years behind schedule. So the reason that this is a sneak peek and the reason that I don't have a publication date for it yet is because I fell so far off the schedule. Like I missed my deadline by so long. So yeah, in terms of publishing early, I found that there was a lot of support online, and everyone in publishing was so like nice to me, but I felt so guilty all the time for like, you know, being so behind on work. So I'm really lucky that like my editor was pretty understanding overall for it. I think my most important pieces of advice for writing are usually like read more and try to read outside of your genre. So I always say like the most valuable thing that I started off as like a creative writing major, which I like later dropped, but the most valuable thing I got from college was this like incredible expansion in my reading list and like the things that I was exposed to, the authors that I was getting to know. So I think that was like one of the most like valuable things that going to college gave me. And the other thing is like, don't be afraid to throw away your work. So the Cartographers, I wrote probably 3 or 4 times full manuscripts that I had to throw out before I like settled on a draft that I thought I could work with even. And the book that I'm working on now, which is like my first book in adult fiction, I've written, I don't know, like probably 200,000 words that just are like stashed away, and are really helpful. Were really helpful to me in terms of like discovering things about the characters or trying things out in the settings that just didn't end up working. But I think it's so important to be able to throw out your work and to read widely. But in terms of motivation, I find that when you're writing a novel, when you're taking on a big piece of work, there comes a point between like 20 and 30,000 words where it gets so much easier. So like the first 20,000 words are so difficult for me. And then at some point between like 20 and 30,000, you start to hit this like, it feels like you've pushed the rock like over the peak of the mountain, and now you have some momentum and it's like carrying you along. So in terms of momentum, I think that's like one of the things that helps me most. Let's see. So I think I'm going to move, or I'm going to talk a little bit about falling into place, I think, in order to introduce our prompt for later. But falling into place, I wrote based on two short stories, like I had said, that I was writing for English class. And so I combined them into what I anticipated to be this like novel length work. But one of them was about these three girls in high school. And I wanted to call this session Read It and Weep because it felt so much like that Disney Channel movie, Read It and Weep, where she like accidentally publishes her diary and becomes like the most hated person in school. Um, and I don't know, I published my book obviously after I finished high school, so I don't know if that was the case, but it was something that was so personal to me that I really never expected that anyone else would read, which sounds kind of silly because I was like obviously actively pursuing publication, but it doesn't, something about like other people reading your work didn't feel real to me or like in any way imaginable. So when I was writing it, it felt like I was able to be so honest in this way that's actually been really hard for me ever since. Like when I'm drafting, especially, to be able to like really let go and just like write down what I'm thinking. Yeah, so for falling into place, I wrote it from the perspective of the imaginary friend, and it all takes place within 24 hours, and it jumps around people's heads. Um, and I don't know, there's like 5 or 6 timelines that get integrated in. So when I was editing, that was something that was really hard for me, like when I was doing copy edits, to make sure that like everything lined up and made sense. Like the timelines all made sense. But when I was writing it, it felt so natural to piece it together that way. And it's the only book that I hadn't done really any outlining for. I just had like this very complete idea of the characters and the stories. And I was writing something that was drawing a lot from my like present life. So I don't know, there was something about writing it that felt so like complete. Like I felt so integrated into the book. And I haven't had that experience again. I don't know if it's because like I feel more aware of people reading my work now. But I found it really difficult to like fall into the story in a similar way since then. I found this really helpful when I was writing Falling into Place, to sort of narrate it, to have like an omniscient narrator, to give her sort of like a presence, so that she could hop around different characters, she could introduce people, she could, handle all these different timelines. So the prompt I have for today: write a short fiction narrated by someone who can only watch events without interfering.
Thank you so much, Amy. This has been really great. There's so much like juicy information being passed along. And you, as a young writer, and now passing along to young writers, we just literally cannot thank you enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you.